Comrade John McDonnell.
They've surrendered control of this agenda, so we're going to help them now cooperatively. Okay. When I looked around the hall and I saw the various faces when I came in, people like Arthur Scargill, Gareth Pearce, Suresh, all the others, the briefing brigade, I thought, I hope Theresa May hasn't been told about this meeting. One mass arrest could destroy the revolutionary potential of the left in Britain as a result. Very briefly, one comment and then two commitments. One comment is this, is when you're on the left, you're swimming against a stream in a capitalist system. When you're on the revolutionary left, you're swimming against the deepest and firmest and hardest currents in that stream. And you need sometimes some spectres of light that you can adjust your compass to so you're on the right course. One of those was Tony Benn. Another is Jeremy Corbyn. Another, for many of us, was the works, the writings, and the discussions, and the beliefs, and the speeches, and the engagement of Mike. If you were in a campaign and Mike was alongside you, you knew you were in the right place every time because of his ability to understand, well, the objectives of socialism, but also the methods of socialism. And I think that's what he gave to us, and that's what we'll miss in the future, but by his works, exactly as Hilary said, we'll be able to remind us of the direction that he gave us. That's the comment. There's two commitments. In the midst of his last period of treatment, 18 months, 2 years ago, he did exactly what he did in every occasion. He went into the depths of the treatment, the understanding of it, but also the analysis of the NHS. And one of the things he looked at was the role of the pharmaceutical industry in the exploitation of the NHS. And in particular, the way that they manipulated patient groups to lobby for certain drugs at any cost whatsoever that would then undermine actually the NHS by the profiteering of these rip-off companies. At the same time, I was going through a similar exercise in my own constituency because I have a number of these companies in there. And Mike wrote a brilliant article. So we approached him. Seb Corbyn and I went down to see him. He was not particularly well, but he met us. We went through the arguments. He introduced us to the literature, did exactly as he did on any subject, went through the absolute detail so we had a firm understanding within 2 hours after we left that meeting. And we planned a seminar in the House of Commons where we'd bring people together to say, how do we develop a strategy and a policy and a campaign, if necessary, of direct action against these bastards who are screwing the NHS through their profiteering through the pharmaceutical industry. Let me give you this commitment. That seminar will happen this year, and it will be done in the name of Mike Marqusee, and we will launch that campaign. We will launch the campaign in his name under his guidance. First of all, to expose what's going on, to recruit those same patient groups, but in a progressive cause rather than the fear and panic that they are now, and to change policy no matter what it takes. And if that means direct action, we'll take that direct action. That's the commitment. The next commitment, finally, very briefly. I was on that bridge at the NHS demonstration, and I met with Liz and Mike, and he was extremely frail then. Funnily enough, the discussions on that bridge when we sat down was about how do we occupy the city a fortnight later, if you remember. But also, what was clear to us then, and we were talking about it, is that eventually they will come for the NHS because it is one of those founding elements of the welfare state that so offends the capitalists and their representatives in government. I was also at the launch of his book in Housemans, when he was clearly in pain. And exactly as Hilary said, that beautiful book that he wrote, but in the question and answer session, his message was, above all else, defend the NHS. Above all else in your campaigning in the future, support all those campaigns that are engaged in defending the NHS and pushing back these forces of darkness. So the next commitment is this, isn't it? On all of us now, let's make the commitment. This is now the darkest hour for the NHS since its foundation. The Queen's speech on May the 27th, then the budget in July, will mean the full privatisation of the NHS, the destruction of the last and best elements of the welfare state. So let's commit ourselves now. Yes, of course, the political speeches need to be made in Parliament, but we'll save the NHS by, first of all, yes, forms of industrial action, but more importantly, the forms of direct action. So if it comes to demonstrations, if it comes to occupations, in the name of Mike Marqusee, let's commit ourselves now. We will be there, won't we? Solidarity to Mike Marqusee. Solidarity.
We can never know what would happen in these sort of alternate universes that we think of, but I reckon it's pretty safe to say that if all the Labour Party had the attitude that John McDonnell has, Cameron wouldn't still be in Downing Street. That's brilliant. You know, it's one of the amazing things, really, after when someone sort of quite prominent dies, and there's sort of certain cliches that are always said, and it's a funny thing, but in all the obituaries I've read about Mike, not one of them said the words, you know, the marvellous thing about Mike Marqusee, he didn't have a bad word to say about anyone. Which is strange. He had a lot of words to say about cricket, as we know, which may bemuse some people. Sometimes if you sort of sat, as I did many days, sort of watching a match, someone would play a forward defensive shot, nothing much would happen, and Mike would then tell you the region of Pakistan that this person came from. They would tell you where the bowler came from. They would tell you what was wrong with the school with about that the bowler came from. They would tell you about the history of the communal battles that there'd been and the sort of socialist movements that had developed in the area where the wicket-keeper come from. And then the next ball would take place and he'd start all over again. Somehow summing up all of that in the next 5 minutes is the very fine cricket writer Rob Steen.
Good afternoon. There are many on the left, maybe even a few present today, who look down on spectator sport, professional sport, much as one might regard a dog dropping, with a mix of disdain and distaste. A prison of measured time was the sniffily derisive view of Professor Jean-Marie Brome, a French sociologist, anthropologist, and philosopher not obviously encumbered by any appreciation of the human need for joy. Ball games and races, or so charge the unbelievers, are a distraction at best, at worst, an activity that taps into the very worst excesses of capitalism. Mike, thankfully, saw through all that blinkered snobbery. Sure, he was only too aware of the naked profiteering, the corruption, the cheating, and the violence, the class divisions, and the traditional prejudices. But he also appreciated the art of it all, the beauty, whether in a classical square cut or in the spirit of fair competition. Better yet, he also saw professional sport as a vehicle for racial progress. That's why, when he began writing about it in the early 1990s, he came armed, unlike 90% of the sports writers I've ever come across, with all the requisite tools. Above all, a conviction that, contrary to the nauseatingly hypocritical practices and platitudes of innumerable Olympic presidents, and especially that noted anti-Semite slavery Avery Brundage, sport and politics cannot but mix. That's why I believe Mike's importance as a sports writer is at least the equal of his more overtly political work. As Shada Ugra will elaborate soon, Mike's importance as an observer of cricket in South Asia cannot be overstated. It will be wrong, nonetheless, to portray cricket as the only sport that captured his imagination. Baseball was a youthful obsession, and Jackie Robinson continued to loom as large in his consciousness as Sachin Tendulkar, Viv Richards, and Matthias Muralitharan would in adulthood. Nevertheless, even though those non-violent instincts nagged, no athlete exercised his thoughts quite as much as Muhammad Ali. Acres of forestry had already been sacrificed to chronicle the life of the so-called Louisville Lip by the time Mike got around to it. But Redemption Song is the most insightful and rounded portrait of the 20th century's most charismatic, complex, and yes, inspiring sportsman. What a pity, then, that Mike should never live to read the ultimate accolade for his work. The soul of Wisden Cricketer's Almanac, an annual brick of a book, long regarded as the Bible of an instinctively conservative game, can be found in the editor's notes. Over the years, these have progressed in terms of liberalism of outlook, most notably in the hands of another pro-Semite, Matthew Engel, a writer far too intelligent, not to say mischievous, to resist offending the straight-laced and the po-faced. In the latest edition, number 151 in an ongoing series, Lawrence Booth confirms his worthiness to step into such substantial shoes, concluding his astute and occasionally slightly radical observations with a nod to our friend Mike. One weekend at university, Booth recalled, he threw himself into Anyone But England, which he called a searingly brilliant piece of iconoclasm. In cricketing circles, however, to be called an iconoclast is the last word in backhanded compliments. As a dissection of English cricket's failings, Anyone But England was forthright rather than merciless, a book demanding change, yet underpinned by deep affection for the game, an ingredient largely and willfully ignored. That it was written by an outsider, and a bloody Yank at that, was assuredly no asset. 2 decades later, the scorn expressed by so many influential British reviewers was being supplanted by respect, and not always grudging respect. Acknowledging in hindsight that the book came from the heart, Booth doubtless took no end of pleasure in quoting Mike's observation that, since cricket is so protean, so durable, so forbiddingly idiosyncratic, one should never be too pessimistic about its future. That the views of a deracinated American Marxist Jew should command such approval from a white, right-leaning, profoundly middle-class pulpit was one of Mike's mightier achievements. I'd love to have seen his face as he read such an improbable but richly deserved tribute. Thinking about Mike this morning, I tried to find a lyric to sum him up. What sprang to mind first was not one by Bobby Z from Minnesota, but by another of our shared passions, Bruce from New Jersey. We made a promise, we swore we'd always remember. No retreat, no surrender. Like soldiers in the winter's night, with a vow to defend, no retreat, no surrender. Now young faces grow sad, and hearts of fire grow cold. We swore blood brothers against the wind. I'm ready to grow young again. So here's to Mike, and I'd have a spliff now if we were not indoors, who proved that passion need not preclude wisdom, and that optimism trumps 5 of a cynical kind. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my absolute privilege to be reading the tribute which Hugh Richards, who many of you sports writers will know, has written for Mike. I'd like to start with a reading from Mike's novel, Slow Turn. It isn't the googly itself, but the thought of it. No matter how well set the batsman, his eyes locked to the ball in flight, his feet moving rhythmically into place. If fear of the googly has taken root in his mind, batting becomes an ordeal. Of course, facing up to a big, fast bowler careering full tilt down the pitch, bent on knocking over your stumps or your head, can be pretty terrifying. And to the casual spectator, the slow, lazy arc of the leg spinner, preceded by a gentle canter of 4 or 5 paces, might seem like child's play. But if a leg spinner with a googly finds a pitch to his taste and can strike that precisely tantalizing length time after time, the batsman will need more than merely physical courage to withstand the torment. Those were the first words of his I read, a brilliant evocation of what it is like to face top-class spin bowling which runs to a full page and opens the novel. I was hooked at once, but also bemused. I knew of a Mike Marqusee at Labour briefing, but he was an American. And this was so vivid it suggested he must have played top-class cricket. That was before I met him. Once I did, I knew he hadn't played top-class cricket, but I also realised how he did it. Mike's sheer analytical gifts were among the greatest I've known. But it was more than that. There was a rare depth of imagination and empathy. And he could apply those gifts to imagine what it's like to face a great leg spinner in the same way that, a white, Jewish, middle-class New Yorker, he had an understanding of what it was to be poor, black, excluded,